I really have no idea how to lead this conversation, so this is going to be so much fun.
How anyone in youth ministry can be more efficient by using AI.
Don't be scared of AI replacing human beings.
In like 2 years, when everybody's using this, you're gonna come back to us.
Welcome to the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. My name's Ashley, and I'm so excited to talk today about the rise of AI and how we can leverage it for innovation in youth ministry. But before we begin, I would love for you to meet the brilliant minds that we have around the table today. So to my right, we have the brilliant...
What's going on, everybody? My name is Matt. I'm a next-gen pastor in Queens, New York, and it's been years since anyone has mistaken me for brilliant. But I appreciate the compliment, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I've been at New Life for the last 9 years in my role as a next-gen pastor for the last 3. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm Dan, and I'm on staff at Orange as the Executive Director of Life Stage Content Strategies, which is a big fancy way of saying I help keep the curriculum teams aligned with theology and ideas like this as we're thinking through some of these things right now. I have been in Georgia for 12 years. I have 2 kids in college and 2 kids in high school. Life is crazy at my house, but I'm super pumped to be here and have this conversation.
I'm Corinne. I am the marketing director for Orange students here at Orange. And I also have 2 children, 2 toddlers, 3 and 2. So my life is literally pure chaos. But I'm so excited to be here with you guys today because I've been volunteering in the youth ministry space for over 10 years. And I'm so excited to talk about how AI can really bring some innovation to the youth ministry space.
I really have no idea how to lead this conversation, so this is going to be so much fun.
It's okay. We don't have any idea of how to answer your questions, so it's all
But
good.
you know who does? ChatGPT.
Absolutely.
In fact, as I was preparing for this episode, I actually had ChatGPT write all the questions I sent you guys
I love that.
in preparation, just
so
because
good.
I felt like it was on brand
Yeah.
to do that. Actually, that's what we should. We should start off by asking ChatGPT some questions.
We should.
We should. I think
Should we ask it what it's rethinking in youth ministry?
100%.
Okay,
That's what we
fantastic.
need to ask
Okay,
it.
let me do this.
Fantastic.
Okay, 1 second here. All right. Oh, okay. Well, here's the thing. As a machine, I don't rethink things,
Okay.
but I
Okay.
can summarize some of the trends or ideas: digital engagement, inclusion and diversity, mental health. I mean, these are things that you guys have been talking about.
Absolutely.
Social justice, interfaith dialogue. Wow.
So this should be our entire next season. is what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Honestly.
This is great.
But it
thanks.
also sounds like ChatGPT has been listening to the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. Or maybe reading a transcript. I don't know if it listens. It's weird.
But it doesn't rethink. So
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
that's great. Hey, there's good ideas in there.
Can you ask it what's the most commonly asked question from a teenager?
Who am I?
Whoa. Pull that one deep.
Oh, well.
Do I fit in?
Whoa. Identity
What is
belonging.
my purpose?
Identity, belonging, purpose. There
Am
you
I
go.
normal? What do you think about? And then insert the issue. Can I trust you? I mean, those are,
I kind of want to cry for
I
some
know,
reason.
Yeah.
those are pretty deep. Now it does say, you know, what I've liked about Chat GPT-4 is that it does seem to give you some caveats. Like, hey,
Yeah.
like this one says, it's difficult to pinpoint a most commonly asked question as it's a question it's asked based on environment, upbringing, educational, personal circumstances. However, many teenagers are asking this. So it's kind of admitting, hey, I'm pulling a stereotypical answer, which I think is what all of our research does, right? Like
Yeah.
when we talk about generations, when we
Right.
talk about all these things, it's saying, I'm going to pull from a thing. Now you, as the human involved with this, what are the ones that you see like really targeting your,
That's so
your
good.
specific?
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that I can't count on that to do all my work for me.
Not all of it. A lot of it.
That's a letdown.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that was fun. All right. Well, let's jump in. The first thing I want to throw at you, I'm going to throw this at you, Corinne, first.
Okay.
which I love that you have youth ministry experience and marketing experience, because what youth ministry in this world doesn't need help with marketing what they do to people who are not yet connected. So I'm so excited to have your perspective in this conversation. So I'd love to know, with the introduction of AI, what is something you're rethinking when it comes to youth ministry and how AI can be leveraged?
I think I've been able to use AI a decent amount in my role, and just for fun, because it's fun to play around with. But I think it's really caused me to rethink how anyone in youth ministry can be more efficient by using AI, or filling the gaps of maybe areas that aren't their strong suit, like social media or marketing. Like you said, how can you use AI to leverage that to help make you better and more efficient?
Oh my goodness. I love that. You said something that I think is so important. You said, use AI to fill the gaps for areas that maybe that you aren't as strong in. What does that look like? And what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So for example, content. Like when you think about, a lot of youth ministries have a social channel or channels on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever it might be. Like sitting down and coming up with what to post can be really hard if that's not your strong suit, if you don't enjoy content, whatever it may be. Why not use ChatGPT? So you could take your talk from the week or your outline and upload it to ChatGPT and say, hey, give me 5 social media ideas. And it's going to spit you out. If you want reels, say, give me 5 reel ideas. Maybe you want content and captions. You could say, hey, could you write 5 captions that I could use on social media for this week? And it's going to give you ideas directly related to that talk. And so it's just a great way where that would maybe take less than 5 minutes. Yeah. So it's a way that you can sit down and have your whole content plan for the whole week by just using ChatGPT. And then if you don't actually want to make it, you could hand it to your student leaders and they could take it and actually create the content for you.
That's so good.
It's really just helping you be better and coming up with new ways to involve your students.
Yeah, I love that it's practical. It's taking something. It's not like, hey, I need you to create this huge thing for me. It's like, hey, take this one part of my 8-mile long to-do list and simplify it for me and do it in a fraction of the time that it would take me to have to sit down and type all those things out. So you're taking the pressure off of yourself in a lot of ways to be this creative mind when maybe that's not your strong suit.
Exactly.
So I think that's great.
Absolutely. I mean, it's honestly one of the reasons why you would purchase a curriculum as opposed to making up your talks every week, right? Like, because at the end of the day, your job is to build relationships. And this takes some of that thinking work, it automates a bunch of it.
Exactly.
So you can spend the really important time of building into your leaders, building into your students, doing all the relational work that AI cannot do.
Well, and I'm sitting here thinking this could be an entire new volunteer role in your ministry. Like somebody who loves ChatGPT and is like studied how to control and how to the prompts, right? Like this could be someone who's never sets foot in your environment, but gets your scripts or whatever from your talk and pumps out those captions or whatever.
Honestly, that's a great idea. If you have a volunteer, even I know in previous episodes we talked about digital volunteers. This is a great digital volunteer role.
That's great.
For sure.
No, but you just said something really important too to take note of. The strength of the response that you get from any of these things is based on how good your prompt is.
Yes.
So if you can identify a person who's really good at just putting together, hey, this is the question that I need you to answer, you'll get a much better response from these things if you've got a good prompt that you're starting with.
I love that.
It could just be finding that one person who's really good at, like, you ask great questions. Like that one kid in your ministry who always comes up with a really tough, like, you ask really hard questions. I've got the perfect job for you.
Yep.
Any question you want, just type it into that little box.
Well, maybe not any question,
Maybe
but
not
okay,
any.
whatever.
Yeah.
No, that's true. And I love that you said that because, Corinne, you said you've been experimenting with it
Yeah.
a lot in terms of marketing and social media posts. What have you learned? Like, what are some specific prompts that you've tried or things that you're like, don't do this.
Totally.
This doesn't work. Like, give it some practical handlebars.
Yeah, well, and I think the best place to start is ask ChatGPT to ask you questions. So you can say, hey, ask me 30 questions about my audience, and it's gonna ask you so many questions. If you say, hey, I'm a youth pastor in a rural town, ask me 30 questions to know my audience. It's gonna ask you how old your students are, what kind of rural area you're in, to get to know you better, so then the content it's putting out actually fits your audience. And I've personally done it, and it's pretty spot on. It's scary how good it is.
So once somebody trains ChatGPT to know their audience,
Yeah.
then what? Like, what have you put in after that? Like, if you're going to make 5 social media ideas from a talk or captions from a talk, what do you say next?
Yeah, so then you could put your content in and ask it to create the content for you. But you could even go beyond social media. So if you're like, I live in a small town, there's not a lot to do. I need events to do with my students. Give me 10 ideas I could do with my students this summer. And it'll shoot you out ideas for that. So it's really just asking it, what ideas can you give me? And then the key is that we kind of already talked about is you taking and contextualizing it.
Yeah.
Like you could maybe take it word for word. Sometimes it's that good. Rarely do I take it word for word.
Yeah.
It's like, it's going to give me a social media caption that I'm going to tweak because I know my audience best. Or it's going to give me an idea that I could do with my students that I'm going to tweak because it doesn't know my exact group.
I love that.
So it's all about, like we say here at Orange, you have to contextualize. You have to contextualize AI as well.
Yeah.
One way that I've played around with it as well is like, let's say I've written something that's like a description for an event that's happening or even social media and giving it to ChatGPT and saying, can you make this more engaging? Or can you make this
that's good.
feel like something you absolutely don't want to miss out on? Rewrite this blurb to make it interesting for a 14-year-old. Like
Make this conversational.
Yeah.
Anytime that you can narrow your audience or narrow the tone of what you're saying, it's really good. If you're like really not great with grammar and you need to send out emails to your parents and don't want to look like you don't know grammar, have it proofread it. Send it in. Please proofread this according to, XYZ standards.
Totally.
And it'll
So
do that
true.
for you. And that's so it's even helping you get more excellent at
That's
what
right.
you do.
Well, I'm even thinking like, if you use a website for your ministry, which I'm guessing there's a landing page for a ministry that you're leading, even if you have like a theme for the year, it's like, take this copy on this website and put this theme throughout it. And then you can do that every time you change the theme.
Yeah.
And it kind of just is all speaking the same language from your social media to your website to your emails.
Here's a confession for you guys. For our podcast descriptions for Rethinking Youth Ministry, I will always write them and then put them into ChatGPT and say, can you make this better? And you know what it usually does? It pulls out 3 bullet points to help summarize the episode, which helps readers because naturally we want to see bullets. We're going to look at that. Yeah. So it's helping me make Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast better, which is fun.
I love that.
That's
so good. Dan, I want to hear what is something that you've been rethinking when it comes to AI and how it can be leveraged for innovation in youth ministry.
My research into AI has been much more philosophical. I'm going to be really honest. I'm looking at it from the 30,000-foot view of where's this going? Why does this happen? All of the big, more existential questions about it. And part of that is because having 4 older kids in my own home who are telling me, hey, one of the first things that we learned when I was in, they were in composition class, right? And they're like, don't use it. Don't use it, generative AI. And then another one that's like, well, you can use it for this, this, and this. And then my wife works at an ad agency and they're like, hey, go all in, see what it can do. Really, really experiment, right? And so you have these students who are the kids that are being raised in our youth ministries who are being told one thing in their schools because everyone's worried about plagiarism. Everyone's worried about, all of these copyright issues. And then people in the workforce, like you at, your work in marketing, my wife in advertising, please use it, figure it out, let it help you become more efficient, let it help you give you a starting point. And so there seems to be this tension between how students are being taught to use it and how adults are being told to use it.
Yeah.
And, I read this quote, it was the Harvard Business Review recently, and it was basically like, look, don't be scared of AI replacing human beings. That will not happen. However, humans who use AI will replace humans who do not use AI. And so it's just this prophetic voice of saying y'all got to figure this out because this is the future. We can't fear it. We have to embrace it and figure it out. So when it comes to youth ministry, I just think about all the conversations that we have with students about critical thinking and discernment and emotional, health. And are they going to turn to AI to ask questions they really should be asking an adult, but because they don't feel like they're in a safe space to ask those questions, like, who am I? Like those purpose, identity, purpose, and belonging that we talk about all the time. Why should I live another day? Why? Like these really hard questions. I want to make sure that we're giving them a safe place to ask those questions in person. And then if we know that they're going to AI, how are we helping them discern and critically think through the responses that generative AI is giving them?
Yeah. There's a difference between what kids are being told and what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's so important that we take time to understand both.
Yeah.
Like, what are the really positive things that come from this technology?
Yep.
But also, what are the dangers involved in this technology? Like, that is huge, because there's a reality. Like, I have a kid who I will not name, but I would love to name, in my ministry, who came to me and said, I got an A on my end of year project I needed to do, and I had AI do the whole thing for me, and my teacher has no idea.
Oh
my gosh.
Yeah.
And I said, and so I asked him, I said, listen, are you sure your teacher has no idea? Because what was your grade on the paper before?
Yeah.
Like, what was the quality of your work? Because if there's this huge difference.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we help teenagers in particular understand, like, yeah, you know what, you can use this, but people are going to know if there's a huge difference between what you used to do and what you're doing now. All of a sudden, people are going to recognize it. So I think we can do ourselves a disservice, even if you don't want to use it. Fine. Like, if you want to be one of those people sitting on the AI sidelines, that's okay, but you need to do the work of understanding how the people you're interacting with all the time are using it.
Yeah.
Because then forget about being a safe space.
Yeah.
You'll be a totally uninformed space.
Yeah.
You have no clue what they're talking about, so you can't even help them navigate this new thing that they are going to interact with. That's right.
I'm so glad you both brought that up, because I feel like there are definitely people listening who are cautious when it comes to AI technology, understandably. And there are tons of conversations about the ethics of it and how to make sure we're using it ethically in youth ministry. I want to unpack that a little bit more together, because I think it's important that we name those very real risks before we unpack more of the things that you just brought up, Dan, which was so helpful. Okay, so some of the risks, some of the challenges involved with AI. Let's put them on the table.
To Corinne's point from the beginning, the idea of efficiency, like you can put into ChatGPT, I can go on there right now and say, I need a sermon of a certain length on a particular topic using a particular scripture, and it will crank something out in about 15 seconds that you could stand in front of an audience and just deliver and attribute it to yourself.
Yeah. You could also do it like in the style of some famous pastor.
That's right.
That has a bunch of content out there.
And so for people listening, why is that a problem?
In my view, it lacks integrity. Like, you can't say that I've committed the time to studying the Word of God, to understand what God is saying to me, speaking into my life. How are the passages that I'm teaching passing through my life so that I can teach from that place? You can't do that if all you're doing is typing it into a piece of software and having it do all of that work for you. So I think that's a huge red flag, especially if you're standing there passing off this work as your own.
An alternative, though, because you still can use it.
Oh, absolutely.
For sermon prep.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're used to going to a software like Logos, where you have 20 tabs open and you're going from like one commentary to the next commentary. You could just say, like, in prep for tonight, I said, hey, who wrote the book of Isaiah, right? And it gave me a very traditional, Isaiah wrote Isaiah, but it also gave me a more academic way of saying there are actually probably 3 writers of the book of Isaiah, and they wrote here, here, and here, and here. And so it rounded out the research.
That's right.
And did some of the efficiency of, instead of me spending 3 hours pouring through these things, within seconds.
You had everything.
I had the theological or like the nuanced answer that I needed that would help me do all the stuff that you're,
Exactly. And I'll give you another one on the other side. So I recently preached a sermon at my church, and after I finished writing it, I put it into ChatGPT and I asked it, where can this be strengthened? Like, where is there lack of clarity? Like, how can I make this, and what are some good application points that I'm missing? And it gave me a whole bunch of stuff that allowed me to go back and tighten up the work that I had already finished doing myself.
That's
And so
awesome.
even like, it's not, don't use this at all, but don't use it to do everything for you. There's a difference between contextualizing and just having it be an end all be all and not doing the work of making it real for
And
the people who
ultimately,
are,
it doesn't know the nuanced stories that are in the room listening.
Exactly.
that's right.
Right? That's the human element.
Exactly.
That I know that those kids are going through this thing at this school. You know, that's where you bring your whole self into it. That an AI generated content, even if you train it, it won't know those specific stories in the room.
That's right.
So we talked about the integrity issue of using content that could be plagiarized from another pastor who's done the hard work. What are some other challenges and risks of AI? And it doesn't just have to be content. I mean, we could talk about AI images. We could talk about video.
I mean, there's a risk you won't have a hand if you generate an AI image. We've all seen the funny images that come out.
That's so true.
Also, it's fun. You just never know where you're going to get.
Yep.
I remember, I'm old enough to remember the advent of the internet in general. And people were asking the same sorts of, what are the dangers of this question? And I think it's very similar. You know, if I have a student that's typing in a question, how do I get saved? You know, if I Google search that, I get 10,000 million answers that I have to figure out, you know, which ones didn't pay to be at the top and you know, that whole thing. I think with generative AI, you kind of run that same risk in that if I'm asking a question, but I don't know the nuance to get me the answer that fits within the tradition or the denomination or the quote unquote orthodox view of that, that is tricky. Right? Those are some of the things that we have to like, and I don't know if it's a danger per se, but it is something we do need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
That there's still things that we need to be teaching about discernment and critical thinking and all of that in our environment. So when we are not with a student, I mean, it's an app on my phone, right? Like I can literally use it at any time. I'm sure it's the same for them, that they can have at least a, how right is this?
Yeah, no, and so what I ask myself is, what's the bias that's in this thing that comes from the person who created it? Because behind all of this, there are people who worked on it, who put it together. And so even to your point, when you put in a Google search, you're getting 10,000 results for a particular thing that are coming from multiple streams. When I type a question into generative AI, I'm getting one answer. And if I take that one answer as this is it, this is the only answer, then I'm subscribing to a particular bias that's coming from that particular machine and whatever it's learned in whatever way it's been trained. And so I have to always keep that in mind whenever I'm taking information from AI.
That's a really good point.
I'm sitting here thinking about one particular instance in one of the churches I worked at when a parent called me and said like, hey, can you come over and talk to our daughter? She is so upset. But she won't tell us what's going on. But we know she'll talk to you. And so I went over there and went downstairs to talk with her, and come to find out her boyfriend and her broke up, and her parents didn't know she had the boyfriend because he lived across the country. She had never actually met him in person. It was an online boyfriend. But the feelings of the breakup were very real.
Yeah.
And I just saw an article about like people having AI girlfriends and boyfriends and in relationship, like even like, is it cheating on a husband or a wife, or in a relationship when you also have this AI girlfriend or boyfriend and people claiming that this is really a relationship and they feel fulfilled in that relationship? Your guys' eyes.
I have so many questions.
I have so many questions.
I can't
mean,
help
that
but
was-
think like,
Is that Her movie?
That was the movie Her from years ago, where he basically
like
fell
Siri.
in love
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
well,
that's
I'm
right.
thinking like, I feel like the conversation of like having a relationship with someone across the world that you've never met was like mind blowing to people.
Yeah.
And then now it's like people feel they are in a very real relationship with AI technology because it's filling a void.
And it does feel real when you're reading it. When you're reading it, it can feel very conversational.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially as it learns you, it becomes more intuitive as you work with it.
Yeah. And if it
which
can
is
ask
what
you-
happens in a good relationship.
But it also
What?
but it makes sense because I guarantee
No.
you that it's leaving all the sticky parts out of the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you're never getting.
It's not going to fight with you.
I'm not arguing with my AI. Be like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Okay, dear.
Maybe
gosh.
a healthier example
No,
of a
no,
relationship
no,
than
no,
they've
no,
had.
no.
I don't know. Like,
False.
I don't know. It just
We can.
It-
That's a different episode.
I can't help but think about it. Like, those are going to be very real conversations we're having in the youth ministry space.
It
if
will.
we aren't already, they will be soon.
Yeah, it's like a Ready Player One. There are a couple scenes in there that sort of, you know that there's a person on the other end because it's in virtual reality, but the kind of the idea is the same. Like, you are an avatar that you are maybe not who you get to be in that AI relationship. You get to be whoever you want to be. You don't have to be the person that you're presenting to the world.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, I could imagine kids experimenting with identity and who they are and who they like and who they're oriented towards in a AI space that they know isn't going to judge them for
Yeah.
sort of their feelings. Like, that does feel like a whole nother episode that needs to, like, I need like 3 more experts on this panel. Like, I just don't know enough. But that does feel like an important conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I
That-
would imagine, I don't know, the positive part of my brain's like, but what if that helps them figure out what they want in a relationship? I don't know. Like,
That's Rethinking Youth Ministry episode 405. Like,
Yeah.
way,
not there yet.
line.
Okay,
way
back up,
down,
back up, back up.
way down the line.
I do think this makes me think of, though, like, when you think of like AI technology when it comes to creating images, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think about I guess for lack of a better word, like the fake images that could be created of, like, so you think about how social media is already really hard for students to navigate, and just the like feeling of like, oh, look at so and so got to do this, or, you know, just feeling like you're not like keeping up with the Joneses. So it's like, now that that's entered the chat, if students are creating images and posting it and like living these lives that they're not actually living,
Yeah.
but creating this persona online, kind of like Dan was talking about, just the dynamics that's going to bring into students' lives.
I know in the art community, there definitely is a lot of conversation about stealing people's work and artwork
Yeah.
and their original ideas, you know, outside of just words. But what do you guys think about that in terms of like youth workers creating games images or images that are borrowing from art styles or pieces? Like, what do you guys think?
I think it's messy.
Right?
Yeah.
Messy. That's a good word.
I think that's the best way I can describe it. It's because, like, that brings up all these different issues about if I'm just taking a little tiny piece and aggregating a bunch of other things together, is it still yours? Do you have a right to be mad?
Yeah.
It's messy.
The AI checkers that are starting to get implemented in schools and colleges and workplaces, where you can, you know, if a teacher gets a paper, they can run it through the thing and it gives them a percentage, like, hey, 10% of, and so a school district has to decide what's the threshold
Yeah.
of plagiarism.
Yep.
And that might be something that you have to think through as a church. Like,
Yeah.
what's our threshold? Is it, hey, this image can be 10% referential, 20% referential,
Yeah.
and get some accountability. Get a subscription for your church to something, and, you know, run some of your photos and talks and, you know, through, if you have decided that we're going to use generative AI in content creation, because then at least you get to make an honest decision, and you're held accountable to something that's not just, well, it feels like it's me. Like, I read it and it feels like, well, yeah, it's going to. It's learned who you are.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it is yours. And so it allows you to kind of figure that out.
I think this is such an important conversation, and clearly we're all like processing this real time
Yes.
and trying to figure the ethics of all of this out. But it's an important conversation for sure. Dan, something else you brought up about what you're rethinking is just like the gap that exists between how adults are using it and how
Yeah.
students are being taught to use it. Let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit more about that.
For the sake of, I don't want my kids to plagiarize, I won't have them use this thing, right? However, Khan Academy, the CEO was just interviewed on Adam Grant's podcast, which is also a Rethinking podcast. And they talked about Conmigo. And Conmigo is what Khan Academy has dubbed as an assistant for teachers and a tutor for students. And the way that works is, a school district, it's starting to get employed in like whole school districts. They're trying it. Instead of it doing the work for you, it tutors you to do the work yourself.
Oh, interesting.
And that's probably some of the future of education, at least, where if I'm a teacher and there's something I had that class in college 20 years ago, I totally forget how to do that thing.
Yeah.
I can go to my teacher's assistant, or I can upload the test and say, hey, can you grade these for me with this rubric, and it'll grade them. And it does.
Oh, wow.
So it's like an assistant, right? Or I forget how to do calculus. Can you do a problem? Show me 3 problems and show me how to do it. For the kid could type in, write me an essay on the grapes of wrath. And it'll be like, I can't do that for you. However, think through these 3 questions. And like it then starts to prompt them.
That's so good.
So I'm wondering, as innovation in youth ministry, what could that look like to have someone not coming alongside small group leaders? Because a small group leader doesn't necessarily have training in trauma. It doesn't have, but do they have an assistant who's like, hey, my kid just said that XYZ happened at home. Give me 5 really important things I could say right now.
Yeah.
And then I have that, and I can answer. And then, who are 5, resources in this area that my student can now go to, like that sort of thing.
Totally.
How does it become an assistant, not a crutch? And then like for the kid, like I could see some application where they're like in Conmigo, you can actually talk to John Steinbeck, right? And have a conversation with John Steinbeck of why he wrote these books and why, he did this. What would it look like for a student to talk to, Mary Magdalene? What was it like to step and see that
wild.
empty tomb, or to turn around and see Jesus face to face in the garden? Like, what would that look like? And what could happen as a result of what's being done now? I think that's where I get excited about filling in some of the, you throw it around all the time of biblical literacy. Well, you have it right at your fingertips if you know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And so are we helping our kids learn what questions they should be asking, and then showing them the tools, that can help guide them in that space? And so I think it'll fill some biblical literacy gaps.
Gosh, Dan, I love what you said about small group leaders. Like that's like youth pastors could train their small group leaders in that way, right? Like if you have questions that you want help, like how could we use AI to assist us and provide better resources?
Yeah.
That's such a brilliant idea.
That's great.
So maybe people that are anti-AI, like what would they say if you're like, oh, you could go ask Mary Magdalene any question you wanted,
You're like, because you're like, what does the text give us? Like, 'cause you're thinking about it from a scholarly aspect, and for sure that is definitely something I think we need to keep in mind. But just based on some of the theological questions I've asked, especially Chat GPT-4, it's giving you several sides. Like it's a well-rounded. Now, if I wanted something more specific to my specific denominational bent, I can prompt it to say that, according to XYZ seminary, how would I speak to Mary Magdalene, right? Like, so you narrow the content it will gather for how she would answer that question. But I do think you would get a more well-rounded look at, this is how people see her. And it would cover, all different facets of the research that has been done. It would just put it into her narrative voice and give her some personality. And I would like to think that's what we do on stage as communicators.
Yeah.
That
That's a really good point.
When I'm sharing Peter's denial, right? I want the kids to feel what Peter felt. And however I explain that and express that and get them into that, they get into his headspace, I think is is powerful. There is a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you are still the human being in the kid's life that helps them unpack that and answer any questions that they might have as a result of that. I still think it could be pretty powerful to have that conversation though, and to learn something from it and understand that story in a different way. Because we're really trying to make the Bible come alive, right? These stories, these ancient stories matter for today. Well, it will matter a lot more if I'm actually talking to Peter or if I'm actually talking to Mary, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's always that.
Totally.
There's always that tension that we're going to live in, and we just have to embrace it and kind of push around. But
Yeah.
I have a really high 8 wing, so I'm like okay with that pushing. So I don't know.
I love that.
As an 8, not even on the wings.
Yeah.
Just as an 8. No, I love that idea. But what I hear you saying is, as youth workers, we have an opportunity not to just use it for ourselves, but to teach the kids in our ministry how they can use it with us.
Yeah.
Because what you just said was, hey, go and ask it these questions, but then leave space to come back and have a conversation with me
Absolutely.
about the way that it's answering the questions. And I love that, because now I'm giving you practical handlebars to do both things. One, to engage this new technology in a way that is useful, that helps, like, you're having doubts about your faith. Here's a place where you can get answers to questions that you're asking. And then you can bring those answers back and we can sit and have a conversation around what this thing is throwing back at you based on what you're asking.
I mean, what would it look like for every small group to have an AI moment?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are your questions? Let's ask it a question this week. Like, and that's
I
like
love
a
that.
discussion prompt.
Yeah.
You know,
I
that's
just did this at a camp.
You did?
We were talking about the difference between being self-centered and other-centered.
Yeah.
And so I asked AI to write me a 5-question quiz to determine if I was self-centered or not. And I literally made everybody take the test. I was like, I didn't make this. This was AI. But
was it legit? Like,
it did a great job. I mean, it used a lot of words. I'm like, this is too many words in a description, but it was fantastic. And it was fun. It was a fun way to engage with AI with a group of middle schoolers who also knew that we're just doing this for fun. They saw me ask the question and ask for the prompt, and together we discovered it. It was helpful.
So here's my question. You had it generate this quiz. What did you think about what it said about you?
It was right. Like I had to give like an option, like there's an A or a B, and then assign it points, and like, you know how you used to take these like tests in magazines or whatever?
That's what I was thinking. And I'm thinking how many of those tests in magazines are actually AI generated now?
Yeah.
Probably all of them.
It did a really great job. I mean, there was a million more questions it could have asked, but what it asked and the results that I got in it, I was like, yeah, you're right, I am. I'm not gonna lie.
I love the honesty.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna go that far and ask, so are you but it's okay.
I am. I'll receive that. I will receive that.
No, but I think that's really important too. Like, you can't, just because it says something, particularly, I mean, you said before, kids are asking this thing, who am I? Like, we still have to teach them how to think critically, even about things being said about themselves.
Yeah.
Just because you type something into a machine, it's spitting back out whatever it does. You still have to think about whether or not what it's saying is reliable, trustworthy, aligns with your broader set of beliefs and thoughts and ideas about the world.
Yeah.
And you still sometimes need somebody to walk alongside of you. And I think as a youth worker, that's my job. Kids are going to use this thing. So you can kick and scream and fight all you want. If you don't like it, do it. But understand that everybody who's sitting in your ministry is interacting with this thing, and they're going to be using it more and more. You're doing yourself and them a disservice if you're not getting up to speed on how this thing is being used in your ministry.
I love that you said that, because I am sure there are people listening who feel really cautious around the whole AI conversation, understandably, because there's a lot of unknowns right now. I would also say to you, you're probably using it and not realizing you're using it just by the tools that you already use that have been integrated with AI technology. But I'm sitting here also thinking about, I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but Facebook came out when I was in college, which meant you could only be on Facebook if you had a university email address at first, right? But I remember my first years as a teacher in the school system, our school system saying, you're not allowed to have a Facebook if you're a teacher, or you're going to lose your job. I remember thinking, this literally is the future. Like social media platforms are the future. And then it was like a few years later, they're sending out an email saying, friend us, like us on Facebook. Like, it was like this quick pivot. And then I remember a few years later being in an all staff meeting at the schools, and that they were saying no tablets are allowed in classrooms. You're not allowed to have tablets.
Oh, my word.
No, because they can look things up on those tablets. They're not going to have them. And I remember sitting there thinking, all textbooks are going to be on tablets soon and going to be on computers. Like, why are we fighting this? How about we just approach it with how do we use this to our advantage? How do we move it forward? And I can't help but think that these AI conversations are the same kind of category. It's like,
they're similar.
you can be cautious about it, absolutely. But what if we as youth workers approached it in a way where we are processing real time what we're learning, where we didn't get it right, where we had fun with it, how it helped us be more efficient. What would it look like to help students engage with it with their faith, and how could it actually grow their faith rather than hurt their faith? But before we wrap, Matt, I know we spent a lot of time talking about what Corinne and Dan have been rethinking, and we could probably talk about this for a long time. But I want to hear from your perspective, what have you been rethinking?
I have been rethinking practically, like what this looks like in terms of the entirety of my job. So how do I streamline? So you mentioned before the idea of efficiency. How do I streamline things like administrative tasks? Like, oh, hey, you know what? I need a consent form written, and I don't want to hire an attorney to write one that's rock solid. Let me have this thing, which is way smarter than I am, which is skilled in all these different things, churn out these consent forms for me so that I don't, maybe I don't get sued if a kid gets hurt on a trip. Or, I mean, it might still happen anyway, but you never know.
you might need a lawyer to look over those.
I need a lawyer to look over it. But that's exactly
But
what
at least
I mean.
it's a starting point.
That's right. It gives me a good, like, how can I use this to get me better starting points in things that I'm not an expert in at all? And so that might mean, again, having it pump out social media captions, having it churn out consent forms for trips and things like that. Having it do things like correct, if I write something, Dan mentioned this before, tightening up my grammar or putting it in a voice that is maybe a little bit more approachable for a particular audience. Asking it those kinds of questions to help strengthen what I'm already doing, not having it do work for me or create things for me. And so I'm wondering, like, where do you draw? I'm rethinking where I draw the lines between where it's okay for me to use AI and where maybe like I'm relying on it too much. And you used this word before, Dan, you said you can't let it become a crutch, because I do think it can cripple you if you rely on it too much. Because then all of a sudden the things that I've been training myself how to do, reading and learning about how to do, now I'm counting on this thing to do. And I think brain atrophy is real.
It is. I was just going to use that word. I was just going to use the word atrophy. And I think that really can happen.
Absolutely, because it's easy to get lazy. And I think this is a tool, and one of the biggest dangers of it is it's so good at what it does. Whether you're creating art, videos, you're having it write essays for you, whatever it is, it can make you get really complacent and really lazy and stop learning yourself, because this thing is doing all that learning work for you. So I'm rethinking the smart ways how to use it so that I can still learn and grow, but also I can leverage what it does really well so I can spend my time doing more important things.
Yeah, Matt, that's so good. I mean, it even has me thinking like a caution. We were talking about cautions earlier. Like, it could take away your confidence, right? If you used it as a crutch and yet was your go-to, you're like second guessing everything. So I think it's like you have to remember the like humanity in you is what makes you you. Oh, that's just so good to think about how you're using it, but have those cautions up.
And also, like, Matt, you talking about, it seems like what are my highest priorities as a youth minister? How can AI ensure that I'm getting to those tasks and I have time for those tasks? Because, I haven't been a youth pastor, but I'm a kids pastor, and those administrative tasks, like, they slowly chip away at your soul sometimes, right?
Slowly.
But to say, like, hey, can you create this? Can you create this? Can you create this? Things that I could do, but they're keeping me from what I should do.
That's right. And I think it's important that you have to know yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you're somebody who's really like you're administratively inclined, you love that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are people who
It'll
are
give you
listening to
life.
this.
Yeah.
Exactly. I just know that I'm not that person. That's not who I am.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I'm diminishing that particular work and that skill set. It just means I'm acknowledging I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
And so I would much rather go to something that makes my life easier in that way, so I have more time to do the things I love, that bring me life, and that like allow me to engage with the people that I'm caring for in a different kind of way.
That's so good. And the reality is, every single person listening is feeling the effects and the scars of coming out of a pandemic. And all of our budgets are tighter than they used to be.
Yeah.
And we might have less help than we've ever had before. So I think that's a really brilliant way. If you're feeling the pressure of how am I going to do all these tasks, maybe the first question you ask yourself is, how many of these tasks can I have my AI assistant help me with in this specific time?
Yeah.
I think that's so good, without stopping our own brain from working and thinking.
Yes.
So we can make time to do the things that we love to do the most and be efficient in the way that we do them. Matt, props to you for suggesting we do this episode. I feel like this is so helpful for me, for all of us to have this conversation real time. Tell us a little bit about why you suggested this episode.
Yeah, because I think there's two kinds of people. You have people who are deeply immersed in this. They're already using it. They know about it, or they're learning about it and growing in their knowledge and understanding of it. And then you have people on the other side who are very, very cautious to the point where they don't want to go anywhere near it and they see it as all bad. But either way, you're thinking about it, no matter which camp you fall into.
That's true.
And so if you're thinking about it, we might as well be talking about it, learning about it, and understanding how it can make our ministries better, or ways that we need that it's okay for us to be cautious about this particular thing. But either way, in like 2 years, when everybody's using this, we're all going to be saying, what have people been saying about this? And you're going to come back to us right now, and you're going to say, what was that conversation they had 2 years ago? Mark my words, it's going to happen.
That's amazing.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. I feel like we
This
could
was
talk
fun.
for another 2
Oh, my
hours.
word, yeah.
So this will absolutely not be the last conversation we have about AI technology. Thank you all so much for listening. And if you are sitting there and you have all kinds of thoughts about how we can use AI technology for innovation in youth ministry, we want to hear about it. Please reach out at Orange Students. Let us know what you're rethinking, because we would love to be part of it.